thanks for tuning in to Keep It Legal, the show where we break down concepts, litigation, and current events with our legal experts. I'm your host, Mark Anik. Joining me today is David Norton of Shackelford, Bowen, McKinley, and Norton LLP in Dallas. David, thank you for taking time out of your day to chat with us.
Delighted. Thank you.
I think I've told you this face-to-face before, but you're one of those people I love chatting with because you and I can both, as Alyssa, our producer, would say, geek out on all things aviation and airplanes.
Yep.
By the same time, I always feel hopelessly inadequate in your presence because I look at your bio, and I want to give our listeners just a few of the highlights. So you went to the Air Force Academy.
Yes, sir.
Commissioned officer in the United States Air Force, served 9 years in the military, nine plus?
9 to the day.
9 to the day.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for all of that. Served as a KC-10A pilot,
Yes.
which is what? Describe the KC-10.
The KC-10 is they took a DC-10, took out the baggage bays, put in extra fuel tanks, and turned it into a flying gas station and cargo mover. So we would move fighter units and cargo and all kinds of stuff into mid-air refuelings all over the world.
Okay. And you did that, according to your bio, in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm. So the first Gulf War, that's 91?
That would, yeah. I got married in 90 and then went to the Gulf War.
Oh, that must have made you very popular at home.
Yeah, it was not a great way to start, but we're still married 30 something years later. So
congratulations on that. Congratulations. Let's see. Also Operation Southern Watch, which was a no-fly zone.
Yep.
Operation Restore Hope, Somalia.
Yep.
You have too many pilot certificates to mention, but you do have an ATP, airline transport pilot.
Yes.
You're type rated in the DC-10. And then part of this you did while you were in the Air Force, right? You went back to school and got your MBA.
Yeah. So I was flying for the Air Force, loved it a lot. Great experience, got so much out of it. But also was at the point where I had to decide if I was going to stay in or get out. And in fact, I had gotten married and the Gulf War started, and then I kept getting deployed. And as much as I loved it, I was kind of looking for a new challenge. At the time I had, if you want to progress in the military, you have to get a master's degree. And I didn't think I'd ever do that. And I actually did that through a program through Louisiana Tech because I was a Barstow Air Force Base and loved it, just absolutely loved it. And Air Force kind of forced my hand and offered me an upgrade, but it was, if I did that, I was going to have to stay in basically for a full 20 years. And I heard about a guy that was going to be an aviation attorney, and I thought my head swung around. I said, you can do that? And so one of the hardest days of my life was the day I went in and put my papers in with my commander and said, I'm going to go do something else. And they all thought I was going to the airlines. And I said, no, I really don't want to do that. I'm going to do this. And once I did that, I got so much support really across the board. So as hard as it was to leave, and I still actively fly a little airplane, not a big airplane. So I miss that. And I miss the camaraderie that I had, but I have so much fun in what I do. And I'm just the most blessed person in the world that I get to do it. So it was by far the best. Hopefully I've had a better impact doing what I've been doing for the last 25 years by going that path.
So let's talk about that. You went to law school.
Yes.
So now you have the pilot certificates, plural. You have the MBA and you have the JD. Let's assume you and I don't know each other and we've just run into each other in the lobby. And I say to you, David, what do you do? I see airplanes all over your office. What do you do? What's the answer?
People ask me that. And if it used to be, if you said I'm an aviation lawyer, they would think that you're a crash lawyer. And I have a lot of respect for them, but that's not what I want to do. So what I typically tell them is I do all of the legal work for people that want to buy and sell very expensive business and personal use aircraft. And they kind of look at me and that doesn't really ring a bell. And I say, well, you know what? If you're buying a $40 million airplane, there's a lot the FAA has to say about it. There's a lot the IRS has to say about it. There's a lot that the local state taxing authorities have to say about it. So then it starts to dawn on them. I said, we do all the structuring analysis to say what's the right way to set this up so that you're not viewed as an illegal charter or you're paying the right taxes. You have the civil liability protection that you think you have. A lot of people set it up in a way that they are completely in the wrong place. So we spend a lot of time either setting them up correctly to begin with, or I also spend a lot of time untangling inadvertent messes that other people create.
Something tells me you're being just a tad diplomatic there.
Well,
Yeah. I want to go back to the answer to that question because I asked you what you do, and I'm looking around your office, which is part law office and part aviation museum. And there's a picture on the wall. It's drawn by somebody, I think, a couple of years younger than you and I. And it says, "My dad is a lawyer who helps people buy and sell airplanes."
that was a unsolicited. My children, my daughter's a grad student now, and my son's started his junior year in college. But when they were probably in their 5-year-oldish time frame, every once in a while on a Saturday, they'd come up and spend time at the office with me, or they'd come up and have lunch, and that was totally unsolicited. I don't remember if he did that for a class, but that kind of showed up one day. And I'd never really talked to my kids about what I did or anything, but he did a really good job of me sitting at my desk on the phone and the computer talking to somebody about airplanes. And he drew that out of scratch. And I think, oh my God, I need to
Frame it,
frame
and
that.
keep
And
it
that's
on the wall.
one of my most precious possessions.
It also occurs to me that if you can explain what you do to your child, that's probably a good explanation for the rest of us as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I think, one of my goals is, and I hope I'm successful at it, people tell me that, is to take all these disparate FAA, civil risk, tax stuff, and to sit and read the Federal Aviation Regulations or the Federal Aviation Act of 1958 just can be totally nonsensical. And one of my goals is to take all of that and kind of distill it down to its key parts and put it in normal English language and say, okay, this is what this means. This is the way to do it. This is not the way to do it. I tell people I'm going to build you a sandbox. The sandbox is, the top rail is FAA requirements, then the sides civil risk, the bottom's federal tax, the side state tax. I've created a sandbox. There's a box. There's lots of places to move within the sandbox. And as you move around, you have different ramifications for each of those 4 areas. And the goal is to stay in the sandbox. So that's our goal, is to try and take all of that and use normal English and normal concepts and normal, examples of, this is what this means. Here's how we stay in the sandbox. And so it is so much fun, back to, again, I'm so blessed with my clients. If the pilot's there, I can talk pilot talk with them, and I love doing that. And then if the CFO's typically on the phone, I can talk a little bit of the CFO talk with them. If the general counsel's on the phone, I can talk all day about the lawyer stuff. A lot of times other folks are there. And the whole goal is to take all of that and make it as plain and as simple as possible, so that at the end of the day, the huge victory for me is when I take somebody who is stepping into the space for the first time. They know they want to take advantage of the awesome advantages of private aviation. And I have the chance to kind of educate them. Quite often we start out a representation and we do, I call it Air Law 101. Usually takes about an hour, a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on where they're coming from. And I say, look, when we go through those 4 things, here's FAA, here's civil risk, here's federal tax, here's state tax. Here are the top 2 or 3 things you need to know about each of those. And then we can build the right platform for what is most important for that client. I have some people that, are scared to death of the civil liability and the regulatory risk, but they're relatively okay with the tax side. I have other people that are totally comfortable with FAA rules and hate paying taxes. And it's obviously there's a mix all over there, but those are different structures. So the goal is to be able to go through all of that, educate them. I love it when I'm doing a Zoom call and I get this kind of aha, like, oh, now what you're saying makes so much more sense than people told me I couldn't do this, but I didn't understand why. So you go through that process, you educate them. And the victory for me is when we get the other side of that process, we have the structure, we help them close on the purchase of the aircraft, we put it in the structure, and they are so happy and comfortable that they actually understand what is going on, and then they know that they're doing it the right way, and that they know what's, coming down the pike. And I love it when that happens, and when that client is so comfortable with it, and then they call me back in 3 years and say, okay, it's time for the next airplane. And we go through the same process all over again. Does that make sense at all? Or
It totally does. It occurs to me that the sandbox you described is something that you construct as you would with your kids to try to protect them, right? Create some boundaries, stay in there, and daddy says you'll be okay.
have some fun. Yep.
So let's talk about that, though, because you've taught me. You and I have known each other a few years, and you've taught back when both of us had darker hair. And you've taught me that people will walk into your office or call you on the phone, and they say what? They say, "Hey, we're a company, and we've grown big enough. We're going to buy us an airplane. It's very exciting." And what's the mistake that you still see all these years later that companies make too frequently?
There is, I think what you're alluding to is what the FAA calls a flight department company. So if you are a lawyer who is unfamiliar with the FAA rules, or you're a very good CPA who's focused on federal tax planning, or you're a bank, or you're a pilot who is talking to your buddy who's an FAA safety inspector, who's an avionics inspector and thinks he or she actually knows the legal side of things, they are all going to, when you say the word airplane, they are going to say, we need to protect you. So we're going to create a limited liability company to provide liability shielding, but we'll treat it as a disregarded entity. Aha. Okay.
Is the analogy if the company wanted to buy the CEO a sports car and the lawyer said, "Oh, okay, let's put that sports car into a separate company"?
Yep, that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, hey, a lawyer would call it a dangerous, the old legal term was dangerous instrumentality. You're doing something that brings risk with it. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of the people that it takes the most time to educate sometimes are really smart real estate people. They're really smart, they're really good, but that's what you do in the real estate industry is you create separate projects and you do it for liability shielding. What they don't get is the FAA says, well, first let me back up. To understand where the FAA is coming from, you have to understand that arguably their primary mandate of all the different things they do, the main one is to protect passengers. That's their charge. So now if you think about that for a second, and they're the ones that publish the rules that say how you're going to operate an airplane. There basically are two sets of rules. There's a baseline set of rules. In my world, you hear people talk about Part 91. That's the baseline set of aviation regulations. I tell people it's highly regulated, but it's not. It tells you have to have an airworthy airplane, you have to have properly trained pilots, you have to follow certain rules of the road. But when I fly my little airplane around, in the 20 plus years I've owned my airplane, I just fly around Part 91. I've talked to somebody from the FAA in an official capacity about my airplane exactly once.
Really?
I got tagged for a ramp check one morning at Love Field. And the gentleman, the safety inspector was, they just go out and they see somebody say, hey, we're going to ramp check you. He looked at my certificates. He made sure the wing wasn't falling off my airplane. We chatted about the weather and he left. He didn't ask me how I owned it. He didn't ask me how I operated it. He didn't ask me what I was doing with it. That's not what they do, Part 91. Now, if you're doing something that the FAA considers to be commercial in nature, which basically means you're carrying somebody around and you're getting any economic benefit for it,
you're getting paid.
You're getting paid. You're sharing cost. You're even sharing fuel. You're lessening the economic hardship on you, so you're getting some benefit. The moment you do that, you're generally going to be considered a commercial operator, and there's a whole different set of rules that applies to that. And now you have to go deal with safety inspectors. They're going to look at what you're doing, and why are they doing that? Why this whole additional layer of regulatory oversight? Because the FAA's job is to protect passengers. The philosophy is, if I, David Norton, have my little airplane and I'm flying it around and it's in my own name, so I know that I am responsible as the operator, and I know that if something goes wrong, the FAA is going to come to me, and I know that if something goes wrong and there's a lawsuit, they're going to come after me. So I'm now going to be very judicious on who I put in my airplane. I can carry them around all day. I'm not asking them to pay for it. They're a guest. If that's the situation, then you know what? Part 91's enough. The moment I'm carrying people around and they don't know that the airplane is in some empty shell of a company that I'm asking them to help contribute to the cost of the flight, they're no longer a guest. They're a fee-paying passenger.
Oh boy.
And they have every right to expect that there's the same level of safety and oversight they get when they jump on an American Airlines flight or a Southwest flight as they do when they get on an airplane. That's the philosophy. And that's the problem, is a lot of people, they want to eat their cake and have it too. They want to say, before the flight, Oh yeah, it's in a disregarded entity. It's just me. I get to use it. What are you talking about? It's my own personal operation. And what they're doing is they're collapsing this federal income tax filing concept, or not collapsing it. They're broadening that out to go across the board. So they say, well, you know, um, I've created Joe Blow's Airplanes LLC. Joe Blow's the member. It's really Joe Blow who owns the airplane. So before the crash, they're like, yeah, it's Joe Blow flying himself around. But then after the crash, it's like, oh no, you can't sue Joe Blow. You got to go sue the LLC. Well, what's the LLC own? Well, it owns the wreckage that's down at the wreckage yard after the crash. That doesn't work. That's called a flight department company. So yeah, I wrote, I started this practice, got into this, kept seeing that structure over and over again, kind of scratching my head and realized what was going on. So I wrote an article for the Texas Bar back in 2002. That article is still out there floating around. I still get clients from that stupid article. It's amazing because so many people do it that way. It's just an ongoing issue in the industry. Now, part of the problem is, to a large extent, the FAA is overtasked and undermanned, and sometimes they can barely keep up with the major air carriers. So they don't generally focus on this world. If you've got a nice shiny corporate jet that sits in the back of a hangar that doesn't, kind of rarely sees the light of day and it's not involved in anything, they don't really look at it. So this doesn't become a problem until after there's an accident or incident. Well, when is it the worst time to find out that you're in an improper structure? It's when there's been an accident or an incident.
And the implications, if you have that improper structure, are rather severe with regard to financial penalties and other problems.
Exactly. Probably arguably one of the biggest penalty you can do is being flying around doing what is actually a commercial operation and doing it without the proper certificates and maintenance and training. That the penalties can start in excess of $30,000 per flight, and then they stack per flight. So that can become pretty significant. And the bigger fear in the industry, and this has happened on some small aircraft, it hasn't really happened on a big aircraft yet, but we're all waiting for the test case, is that there's a significant accident. It becomes clear that this was going on, that it was, especially if the people knew that it was improper, and your insurance company looks at you and says, you said under your policy you were flying non-commercial and you would follow the rules, and you're doing neither correctly. We are therefore denying coverage. So that's what I was talking about, is people think that, I'm going to put it in this LLC, we're going to do all this liability shielding, we're going to fly around non-commercial Part 91, this is awesome. Yeah, so you think you're in the best possible position, and you're actually in the worst possible position. If the one thing you were guarding against happens, a crash, and there's a very unhappy family member who comes after you and says you were doing this all wrong and my relative would not have died had you been doing it right. That's the nightmare scenario.
So when someone shows up at your door and they've created that entity improperly, do you and the others here have the ability to turn that around? And how challenging is that?
It's actually not that challenging. If you educate the client and they understand what's going on and they want to do that, there are a couple of different ways to fix it. To the FAA's credit, they're not a real punitive type. They're interested in safety and they want people to comply. So if you're doing something wrong and it was inadvertent and you quietly fix it and you go forward and do it correctly after that, they generally don't come back after you. Now, if you know you're doing it wrong and you continue to do it wrong, that's when it can get really ugly. So yeah, there are different ways to fix it depending on what you want to do. And so that's what we do is that's where I said we'd spend a fair amount of time untangling the messes that have accidentally, it's usually accident. There's very rarely is it done on purpose. It's just the lack of knowledge. It's you don't want me negotiating your real estate contract. I'm like the last person you want to do that. I'm a lawyer. I'm a 25-year lawyer. I don't do real estate contracts for a living. It befuddles me sometimes why you go to a real estate lawyer and ask them to do your aviation contract. You just got to make sure that you're talking to the right person for what you're trying to do.
Someone who knows the drill and has been through it a few times.
Yeah.
You and I are sitting here having this chat in the fall of 22. We are 2.5 years out from the beginning of the pandemic, the shutdown, and everything that went with that. Let's take these in stages. At the beginning of the pandemic, how did it affect private aviation? How did it affect what you do every day?
Yeah, in the spring of, 2020, I guess.
2020.
When it first hit, everything shut down. Everybody shut down. There was I wouldn't say panic, but lots of concern. Aviation shut down. Transactions shut down. But you know what? That only lasted about a month or two, because what people quickly realized was there were a lot of people that still wanted to travel, but they wanted to figure out how to do it, or they weren't on an airliner exposed to everybody else and having to go through the airports where they're exposed to everybody else and so forth. When you fly in private aviation, generally you're on your own airplane and you're going, directly to the fixed base operator, to the little private terminal. So all of a sudden there was kind of an aha moment where, gee, if I'm here in Dallas and I want to go, maybe I have a property in Colorado, or I want to do something with my family, the safest way to do that is on a private aircraft. So it's slingshot from nothing going on to the last 2 years have been the busiest 2 years
Really?
of my practice. There were a lot of people that, they could charter a little bit, or they could afford first class seats on the airlines and so forth. And there was a little bit of a stigma maybe on having the private aircraft. That's gone now, man. And I tell you, every once in a while, my clients will fly me around a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is nice. You go to the private terminal. You don't have to go through TSA. You go where you want, go when you want, so forth and so on. A lot of people do that, and they're never going back once they've had a taste of that. So, yeah, it's been a crazy market. I think it's probably slowing down a little bit. I think that's the conventional wisdom, is it's starting to even out a little bit, but it's still pretty strong. And the feeling is that even as we continue to get, I don't know that we're past it, but continuing to learn to live with COVID, that there's still a lot of people that are just, it's not going away. The market's going to stay fairly strong.
Right. That increased demand has that had some sort of impact on price that you see for airplanes?
Yeah, it used to be a fairly balanced market, if slightly a buyer's market. The last 2 years, especially, it became a total seller's market, and which, great for my clients that are sellers. I had one client I like a lot. We helped him buy an airplane. He was going to start flying it. Immediately got offered a price that was so far above it. He just turned around and flipped it. He just sold again because he made so much money. I've had clients that have owned airplanes for a couple of years and end up selling it equal to or slightly better than what they bought it for, which is unheard of in the industry. Now,
Yeah.
it doesn't apply to all airplanes. It depends on what airplane you're talking about. Now, I'm not a broker, so I don't want to say that I can tell you what are the models that held their values and so forth. But yeah, there's been a lot of strength in that. But it's also led to some craziness. There probably overinflation on prices. There are people that have not really vetted. There's, in the airplane world, it's a very strong used market, more so than with a car. With an airplane, to follow the rules, and everybody generally does this, it's very highly regulated on maintenance histories and so forth. So there are a lot of airplanes that fly a long time, and you can get an airplane and look at it, and it's been maintained properly. You can refurbish it; it looks brand new, and it's a good airplane to keep flying. So that's a very vibrant market. The problem is, in a used airplane deal, when you buy the airplane, the general rule is you get to look at it, but the moment you close, the old caveat emptor, it's your airplane now.
Right.
So if something breaks 5 minutes later, too bad, so sad, you don't get to go back to the seller. Well, there's been a lot of restrictions on those inspection rights, and some people they want the airplane so badly they're willing to do that.
Restrictions because of COVID?
Well, no, because the seller's saying, I'm not going to let you do. The problem is every time you do an inspection, you're opening the panels, they're going to find something to fix.
Right.
Sellers are saying, yeah, no, if you want it, you can buy it as is. Okay. So that's where you have to sit down with your buyer and say, you realize you can do this, but I'm warning you, don't come and complain a month from now when you find some major corrosion issue that you normally would have found, but you didn't because you agreed not to do an inspection.
Right.
That's your problem.
You're buying a house and the furnace is broken or the air conditioning is busted.
Yeah, it sounds like I think that's right. If you read about the housing market, there's a lot of analogy to what's been going on. So
I read in the aviation world with the big boys and girls, the commercial, Americans in Southwest, that they can't find enough pilots.
Yeah.
Is that true in your world as well?
Yes. We've been talking about this in the industry for forever. I mean, people that really track this stuff knew 10 years ago that this would happen. And it's partly because there's been less military pilots. That used to be a huge pipeline. If you don't go through the military and you go the civilian route, you can get some really great training, but it can be very expensive. So they've been seeing this, and COVID didn't fix the problem. It kind of pushed back a little bit in the sense that when COVID started and they cut way back on flight schedules and so forth, the problem that we knew was looming kind of went away. So there were a lot of pilots that were laid off or trying to decide what to do. Well, now that the airlines are back, just, their hair is on fire, and private aviation's been stronger than ever. Yes, it has come back with a vengeance. This issue with where are we going to get pilots? Well, that's put a lot of pilots kind of in the catbird seat because that's supply and demand, higher salaries. In our world, is kind of an issue with pilots that if you're flying different kinds of airplane, you have to get, depending on the airplane, you have to get, as a pilot, you have to get type rated. That's an expensive proposition. So you go out and do that. And some pilots are good, ethical, honest. Hey, I'm going to do this. You put me through the training. I'm going to fly for you, and kind of pay that back. There are other pilots that get type rated. They are now much more attractive, and they let themselves get hired away from somebody else. And that's kind of a problem in the industry. So that's part of what you talk to, and you work with the pilots and you work with the owners, and you make sure you have a very clear understanding of what's going to go on. But yeah, it is definitely getting harder and harder to find pilots that are willing, that are qualified and that are willing to kind of step into that type of operation you may want to conduct. So
what are the other issues that are at the top of your list of late?
Probably the other biggest issue that we hadn't really talked about is we do a lot of tax planning. The biggest piece of that was several years ago with the Tax Act of 2017. There was this concept of bonus depreciation. So that was another driving factor kind of on top of COVID for people that want to go buy airplanes. And the concept is that if you're a business and you buy an airplane and it's worth $10 million, if you set it up correctly, you could take a $10 million expense against income for your company. Well, that can be a pretty good deal, depending on where you are. Now, the problem is a lot of folks that are in this segment aren't really buying the airplanes just for business. They're buying it for personal use. They want to move their family and friends around, which is great. That makes sense. They're time machines. But there's this disconnect. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had where people come in and say, yeah, the broker, the airplane manufacturer, they're telling me this is great. I can buy this and write it off and it's not going to cost me anything. And great. Well, what are you getting the airplane for? Well, I'm getting it to go to Colorado and go skiing. Okay, how does it support your business? Well, it doesn't. Okay, there's a fundamental misunderstanding there. You only get to expense an airplane, a desk, a computer against the business that's using it to generate the income. You're telling me there is no business. You don't get to expense that, right? So that's been a difficult conversation to get people to understand that, and to make sure that they do it right, because the consensus is that if you're buying an expensive airplane and you're trying to take full bonus depreciation, you are at the top of the heap for potential audits to make sure that you did it right.
How does the law work in that case? Does it allow you to say, well, okay, 70% of the time, this is a business use? Are you able to apportion it in that manner?
Yeah, there are very few airplanes that are 100% business use. I do have some clients that are 100% business use, and that's fine. But most airplanes, it makes sense that, especially if it's a business and it's a family-owned business, and you're going to use. So there is a way to properly do that, and depending on what you're doing, the general concept is if you have an airplane or business and that's 70% business use and 30% personal use, and that's a fairly common allocation, that you're going to basically get 70% of the business expensing benefit, and you'll have to deal with the personal use and the 30%, and you can work that out. The problem with bonus depreciation was you're trying to take one expense at one time and it's 100%. And now if I have 70% business and 3% personal, I've just lost 30% of the benefit. So it's like, why do you want to do that? There are other schedules that you can use that are perhaps better match what you want to do. But it's just that disconnect. People get very excited about, oh, I get to write it all off. Well, no. Of the 10 people that come into my office that want to do that, maybe 3 of them can actually truly get the full benefit. So that's part of that educational effort. That's part of that Air Law 101. It's like, okay, here's the federal, and there are a couple other federal issues we talk about too, but that's been the main one. Now that's going to start to step down. It's through this year, it's 100%. Next year it goes to 80%, and it's going to taper off. So to some extent, it's going back to the pre-full bonus depreciation days.
I want to come back to your office for a moment because I mentioned all the artifacts. I love the desk lamp, the beacon.
Isn't that fun? You recognize what that is?
Yeah,
You know what that
I
is.
know what that is. We've got a propeller as your ceiling fan. Are there any particular items in here that are treasures beyond the one we mentioned before, the drawing by your son?
I guess there are two treasures. For a while, before they made me a pilot, the Air Force made me a navigator. And that was way pre-GPS, way before it was at the beginning at inertial. So I actually was taught how to navigate a jet flying at 500 miles an hour using a sextant and a radar scope. So I have hanging in my office 3 of the charts that cover the United States that was what I would use as a navigator. So that's kind of fun. Probably the biggest honor I have that means the most to me is I have a picture of a KC-10, and
Which this is the aircraft that you flew.
That's the main aircraft I flew. I think my wife helped me mount that in a photo frame with my squadron patch and my name tag and wings and so forth. But if you'll notice, there's a patch on it. That's my squadron patch. But on the it's a drawing. It's a pen and ink drawing of a KC-10, and there's another squadron patch above that, and that's actually the maintenance squadron. You know, I said one of the hardest things I ever did was put my papers in. When I put my papers in, and so I kind of went to an inactive status. I think I was the chief pilot, so I was helping to schedule. And for a few months, you're kind of in this phase where you're not really flying that much or at all, and you're getting ready to get out. And the maintenance squadron asked me to come over, and they hosted a pizza party for me.
Oh, wow.
And that is a drawing that one of the young airmen had drawn, and then the squadron liked it so much they replaced it. And that was a gift to me from the maintenance squadron. And what that meant was that I was one of the aircraft commanders that I so respected my maintenance guys. They were saving my life every day, and I really tried hard to take care of them. And I was almost crying.
Yeah.
Because that meant so much to me that I was one of the few people that they actually hosted.
If the maintenance guys like you, you're doing something right.
Yeah, that just was such a huge honor. So that's probably I look at that and I think, okay, that's part of the camaraderie that I kind of missed from my military days.
I want to play a little bit of aviation round robin with some stories that have nothing to do with your practice, but have to do with aviation. They're just fun to talk about.
Okay.
Topic number 1, Taylor Swift. Just plain wrong. Celebs with the worst private jet CO2 emissions. So, and in Taylor's defense, before we get here, the other people on the list, we've got Alex Rodriguez, Drake, Kylie Jenner, Floyd Mayweather. What do you think of celebrities flying their private planes around?
Yeah.
And let's remember, one of them could call David Norton and say, David, I need your help.
I do have a number of, obviously we have lots of high net worth clients and a number of celebrities. I don't think any of that list are on my client list. So I don't know the specifics of what was going on with them. Part of the problem is you can have an airplane, and this is a huge issue within the industry, is this security concept. You know, when I go get on an American Airlines flight, nobody really knows that I'm on that American Airlines flight. When I'm flying around in my private aircraft, if you know what you're doing, and this has been a problem for Elon Musk, you can figure out that airplane, and now you know where they're going. So that's one issue. The second issue is you may have the airplane, and if you do it correctly, you can let other people use the airplane. So just because the airplane's flying does not mean that person is on board every time. If you're somebody like one of those celebrities, just the fact of the matter is, in our day and age, there's some serious security concerns for their safety as they're out traveling around. And a very good way to address that is by using private aviation. Now, the industry recognizes, if you look at it statistically, aviation contributes a pretty small sliver compared to other modes of transport. But there are differences. One is when you're flying a corporate jet, when you're flying on a 737, generally all the seats are filled. So it's the ratio of people to the output is different. So you got to be cognizant of that, but it's a little bit of a balancing act of, it's kind of the same thing when you're driving your car around. Does everybody carpool? No.
Right.
If you can afford your own car, you generally drive yourself around where you want to go. Nobody really poo-poos that, right? So the industry they're very cognizant of this, and a lot of the associations are really working on sustainable fuel efforts. And I'm speaking at a big conference, Revolution.aero, on Monday and Tuesday. And that's the Advanced Air Mobility. It's a conference on that, and that's the cutting edge, very small aircraft, primarily battery powered electric.
Right.
There are things going on in the industry for fuel efficiencies and new technologies that we're trying to get to improve that situation. Because I think for the most part, people are cognizant, we need to address that issue across the board. And if there's a public perception, then that's, even if it's not statistically as significant, that's still an issue and needs to be addressed.
Item number 2. Headline: 2 Air France pilots suspended after cockpit fight. I'm sorry, cockpit fight. What do you think of air crew having a fight inside the cockpit?
I saw that article. Again, I don't know beyond what little I saw in the news about it. That does not happen very often. Thank goodness.
I hope not.
Yeah, it's, for the most part, the folks that are out there that are flying are very professional and so forth. That being said, we're all human beings and you can have conflicts. And depending on what's going on, flying in a cockpit with all those lives at stake and your own life at stake and the technologies, it can be a pretty high stress situation. So beyond that, I don't know. It's, I will say there were times where I'd want to reach over and smack somebody I was flying with because they were doing something stupid. But for the most part, I'm very comfortable, when I'm flying on the airlines.
My last one: NASA preparing for late September Artemis 1 launch attempt. Are you like me? Are you a space geek drinking this up like
I am
1969 all over again?
I am very lucky that because of some friends I have and people I know, I've actually had a chance to go down and try and watch
really
the 2 launches. So, and that is just an amazing experience to be able to do that. A lot of people think the fact that it was scrubbed is the term, is a failure, and they don't understand that's not a failure. Launching that vehicle, it was a little bit of a push and pull because Congress very much wants that to happen. And I support the concept of what's going on. I want us to continue to explore and be a species that gets out and does that and so forth. Congress does it because NASA's spread out all over the place and it's great for jobs, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But they also wanted some efficiency, so they're trying to reuse some of the equipment from the shuttle program. So to a little bit, I think, this is my personal, this is not official. I'm just kind of what I've heard and observed, is they're a little bit constrained because they're kind of using technologies that perhaps are not the newest. So all that being said, it's one of the most complex pieces of equipment mankind has put together and has launched, and it's a big deal, and every little thing has to work. Even though it was unmanned, the last thing they want to do is have it launch and not work right or destruct or so forth. So the fact that as they're going through that and they're testing things and they find something and they stop it and they fix it, that's exactly how it's supposed to work. That's how the system is supposed to work. It'll launch eventually. They'll make it happen. The people at NASA and in the industry are amazing. I will tell you, I had the chance to watch some shuttle launches, and there's nothing. It's just so amazing, the power of that and the ability of mankind to lift that up and go do that exploration is just so moving. So I'm cheering for NASA. I think they're doing the right thing. I cannot wait to see it actually launch. It's gonna be a blast. I don't know if I'm gonna get a chance to go back and try again, but it was fun to go when I was able to go.
Very good. Hey, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Oh,
I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Likewise. It's always fun to chat with you, and because you do know the aviation industry so well, and you're a fellow pilot and everything. So.
Well, I'm a little baby pilot compared to you, and for the record, have not flown in a few years.
Yeah, that's okay.
But if you want to offer to take me up sometime, I'll go along.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you, David. That was David Norton, head of the aviation practice at Shackelford, Bowen, McKinley, and Norton LLP in Dallas. You can visit shackelford.law for more information about the firm. Shackelford has law offices in Dallas, Fort Worth, Frisco, Austin, Houston, Nashville, Tennessee, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. To all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Remember, you can write in questions for our next guest on any of our social media channels. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram for more information about each episode. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and tune in next time to Keep It Legal. I'm your host, Mark Anik. We'll see you then.